We might call it in the church sometimes, we call it a mountaintop moment. This is going to fit that because it's going to be literally on a mountaintop, so that's going to help. But this moment that we're going to talk about, we call it the Transfiguration, okay? Transfiguration. It's a transfiguration of Jesus. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that is in a little bit. But what happens as we're going to go through this, it's not going to end with the mountaintop experience. Because by the end of the chapter, or even in the next section, Jesus is going to lead his disciples back down the mountain into the messy realities of faith, failure, sin. And what we're going to find here is that this chapter, or this section we're going to look at today, it's a reminder that following Jesus, it means both the mountaintop, but it also means that you've got to live in the valley. It's the mountains and it's the valleys. It's the peaks and the valleys. And so it's about seeing his glory. It's about living out our faith in the daily grind, knowing that we have this glorious Jesus on our side. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to break these down. We're going to read two different stories that can feel very disconnected, but I do believe that they flow together, and that's why the author of this put them together. It's because they go together. We're going to see both the mountaintop and the valley. So we're going to begin in Mark 9. We're going to look at chapter 9, verse 2. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves to be alone. He was transfigured in front of them, and his clothes became dazzling, extremely white, as no launderer on earth could whiten them. All right, we're going to take a short time out there. We're actually going to take a few timeouts through this because this is a weird passage, okay? So it's already started to get weird. We got the writing of this just says, hey, and Jesus was transfigured in front of them. What does that mean? He's glowing and he's white clothes, and I don't know. The whole thing is weird. It's only going to get weirder. And Jesus says the Bible here is just going to pile weirdness on top of weirdness. And so here's what it says. It says he was transfigured. It says that he changed. It says that his clothes changed. And I like to read it kind of like this, as a kingdom kind of, right? And so all the clothes became dazzling, extremely white, as no launderer on earth or no launderer in the kingdom could whiten them, right? It's just so weird, right? And so here we are, we don't know what's going on. What does transfigured mean? And so as I'm looking at this, I'm no Greek scholar. I don't know, you can't put Greek in front of me. I'm not going to be able to read it for you, okay? But it's the language that Jesus spoke. And so I'm okay, well, let's kind of look at this a little bit. Let's see what other people have to say. The word there is metamorpho, which is where we get the word metamorphosis. And so literally what it just means is to change form or to be transformed. And so in verse 2, it describes Jesus' outward appearance as changing in such a way that his inner glory, his divine nature, shines through. And so his face, his clothing, they're all radiating light. It's just a visible sign of his heavenly glory. We can see that if you want to see it again. You can see it in Matthew 17. We have the same story in Luke 9. But as we keep reading here in verse 4, here's what it says. Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking to Jesus. Okay, in case you don't know, Elijah's dead, or actually Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire, so he's not dead, but he's not on earth, okay? Moses is dead, all right? These people are gone, and all of a sudden, they show up, okay? So here we are, Elijah's with them, Moses is with them, and they're talking to Jesus. And Peter says to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let's set up 3 shelters, one for each of you, one for Moses, one for you, one for Elijah, because he did not know what to say since they were terrified. Right, we got more craziness, more weirdness here. Here's Elijah, here's Moses. They show up, and I don't even know how Peter, James, and John know that that's Elijah and Moses. Because they've never seen Elijah and Moses. Like, these guys have been gone forever. They just seem to know, or maybe Jesus introduced them, say, hey, these are my pals, Elijah and Moses. You don't know them, but I've met them in times past, and they're here hanging out with me on this mountain. I don't know what's going on. Like, none of it makes sense to me. The whole thing is just this weird picture and weird interaction. And I like to picture it like this. I have a picture, I think. Yeah. Obviously, Jesus is Yoda, but they're just transfigured and hanging out, right? That's kind of how I like to picture it. You could take that away because then that's all anyone's going to look at. And here we are, right? We're back in this encounter, and it's strange. And you have to admit the whole thing is weird. And Peter's like, I can't believe that we're seeing this. Right? He's like, it's good that we're here. I'm so glad that we got to see this. And then, as usual, Peter, right, he has no idea what's going on, but he still has something to say. He's like, remember what happened last week? We talked about Peter, and Peter had something to say about Jesus when Jesus said, hey, I must be tortured and killed, and then I'm going to rise again. And Peter's like, no, that's not going to happen. And then Jesus get behind me, Satan. Peter has no idea what's going on, yet he still thinks he has something to say, and so he says it. And here we are again, right? It's only 6 days later. He's like, Jesus, I'm scared. I don't know what's happening here, other than the fact that you're glowing. But you seem to be chill about it. You seem to have things under control. You're talking to these guys. Hey, but Jesus, I'll take it from here. We should build y'all some shelters. Now, this isn't what this passage is so much about, but it just made me ask the question, made me think, why is it that the least qualified people always seem to have the most to say? Right, Jesus has this under control. He knows what's going on. And here is Peter. I don't know what's going on, but I have something to say. We should build shelters for you. Well, thankfully, God, right, he's going to step in. He's going to help out a bit. So keep reading with me in verse 7. A cloud appeared, overshadowing them. And a voice came from the cloud. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except for Jesus. And they were coming down the mountain, and he ordered them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept this from themselves, questioning, what is he talking about? What is rising from the dead? So lots happened, right? But what is really going on here? Why does this matter at all? Why does it matter to us? Why did it matter to them? Well, first, while it would seem, right, it would seem new to these 3 disciples, this wasn't new glory, right? This glorious, transfigured Jesus, this was new to the disciples, but this wasn't new glory. It was revealing the glory that Jesus already has as the eternal Son of God. You might remember John 1 tells us that Jesus has always been with us, right? He's always been with God. In John 1:14, it tells us, and the Word became flesh, and it dwelt among us, and we saw his glory. Glory as the Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So what Jesus is doing here is he's just revealing exactly who he is to 3 dudes who he trusted the most. And they still just don't understand it, right? Sounds a little bit like me. But then we get to Moses and we get to Elijah, right? He's appearing with them, right? And these guys, there's a reason that these guys are there, and they symbolize both the law and the prophets. They symbolize the law and the prophets, and they bear witness that Jesus is the fulfillment of God's plan, right? The entire Old Testament points to Jesus as Messiah. And these two men, but in particular, Elijah, he's the prophet Elijah, and then you have Moses, the one who's the bringer of the law. That is what they're doing. They're pointing to Jesus. They're saying that all the law and all the prophets, we all point to Jesus. And then God makes it very clear. These two leave, and he says, follow this man. Jesus is worth following. He's the one that these guys have pointed to all along. And we actually get the Father's voice as he identifies Jesus as his beloved Son, commanding them to listen to him. And so in all of this, what we get to see here is we get to see the identity of Jesus affirmed. And if there were any doubts, right, any doubts for these three men, they should be completely erased by this point. The Transfiguration shows that Jesus is more than a teacher. It shows that he's more than a prophet, but he is the divine Son of God. And not only that, it foreshadows this resurrection glory. It shows what things will be like in the resurrection. It's a preview of the risen, glorified Christ. But then he tells everyone, he tells these three people, these three guys who gets to see this, I need you to be quiet about what you saw. Like, please, don't tell anybody. We see this from Jesus every once in a while. And probably because, like, if everybody knew, they'd probably try to take him to go conquer Rome. Remember, this is a major theme with Jesus. People had a wrong idea of the Messiah. They were expecting this political conqueror, this national liberator. And if Jesus, the news of Jesus, especially what they saw on this mountain, like if it spread too quickly, it would distort his mission. It would stir up the wrong kind of following. And Peter, James, and John, right, they still didn't understand the resurrection. They were still questioning what that even meant. They've just seen Jesus' glory, but they yet didn't understand his suffering. They didn't understand his death. If they went around telling everyone, we saw Jesus shining with heavenly glory, without understanding the cross, it would have given people a half-truth. And so Jesus didn't want glory proclaimed apart from his suffering and apart from his resurrection. The Transfiguration only makes sense in light of an empty tomb. And now these poor guys, right, they're more confused than ever. They just saw the coolest thing they'd probably ever seen in their life, and they can't tell anyone until Jesus is raised from the dead. So they just saw the coolest thing that ever happened in their life, and then they can't tell anybody until they see the new coolest thing they've ever seen in their life. And Peter already says something stupid, because that's what Peter does, because he didn't know what to say, and now they don't want to ask about the resurrection. It's like, oh man, I already said something stupid. I'm not going to ask a question about this. And so now they don't know what to do. They're walking down this mountain, and they still have questions, but they keep those questions to themselves. And so then they say, well, I'll ask this. I'm going to ask what is probably a less important question. We see it in verse 11. Then they asked him, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Elijah does come first and restores all things, Jesus replied. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they, whoever they is, they would be the Pharisees, but they did whatever they pleased to him, just as it was written about him. All right, if you thought you were done with like weirdness of this part of the passage, it's not over, because here we are. We've got just a little bit more, right? these three apostles, they just saw Elijah on the mountain, so it kind of triggers their memory. Oh man, didn't the Pharisees say that Elijah had to come back? Didn't the scribes say that we're still waiting on Elijah to come back? Hey Jesus, what's the deal with that? It was on their minds. And so they asked Jesus, why do you think the scribes say that? Why do they think he must come first? And they would have actually gotten this from Scripture. This would have come from Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6. It says, "Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children and the hearts of their children to their fathers, so that I will not come and strike the land with complete destruction." And so the tradition that was taught is that Elijah would appear before the Messiah. And from what we get in Scripture here, Jesus simply says, yeah, he already came. And they did whatever they wanted with him. And I read that and I'm just like, thanks for the clarity, Jesus, because it's not a lot. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what scholars tend to believe about this. And if you believe something else based on the limited info that Jesus just gave us, I'm going to be okay with that, all right? But I'm going to tell you what scholars tend to believe. When Jesus says Elijah has indeed come, he's not referring to the literal prophet Elijah coming, but he's referring to John the Baptist, okay? All right, well, that's a leap, right? Maybe. Who says, he fulfilled Elijah's prophetic role. And just as Elijah was persecuted in Scripture, John was also mistreated and persecuted, eventually beheaded and executed and beheaded. And this is kind of where we get that. If you go back to Luke 1, verses 16 and 17, this is as the angel of the Lord is speaking to Zechariah, right, the future father of John the Baptist. It says, "He will turn many of the sons of Israel back to their God, and it is he who will go as a forerunner before him with the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of fathers back to their children and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." And so what Jesus is saying potentially here is that when John the Baptist came on the scene, when he turned the hearts of children back to their fathers, just as Malachi 4 and 5 says, as he turned the hearts of people back to their God, just as Malachi 4, chapter 4, verse 5 and 6 say, that this is the spirit of Elijah. You believe something else, that's okay. But that's the closest thing that we can get based on the limited information that Jesus gives us and based on what we see in Luke 1. But here's the point of all this. There's a purpose in the mountaintop. Right? Things are about to start. Things are changing. When you get to Mark chapter 8, we're in 9 now, but when you get to Mark chapter 8, you see a drastic change in what Jesus is doing, where Jesus is going, what his ministry is doing. Things are moving rapidly towards the cross. And things are happening. And not all of it is going to be good, and not all of it is going to seem good. And it's the mountaintop that is needed to help us when we get to the valley. We need to remember that when things are tough, if you know Jesus, you have seen the glory of the Lord. You have seen the mighty works of Jesus, not only in Scripture, but you've seen it in your own lives. You've seen it in the lives of people around you. And we need to remember the voice of God that says, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." Right? This is crucial. The Father is saying, do not get distracted by the law and the prophets. Do not even get distracted by the glory of this vision, but focus on Jesus. He's my beloved Son. He is the fulfillment of it all. Listen to him. Don't get distracted by Elijah. He's already been here. Listen to Jesus. Don't get distracted by life, by hurt, by questions, by fear, insecurities, unanswered questions. Listen and follow Jesus. And church, mountaintop moments are real, but they're temporary. And God sometimes gives us these powerful experiences, like maybe at a retreat or a worship service or in prayer, these things that kind of strengthen our faith. But we're not meant to stay there forever. The Christian life is lived in the valley, where faith is tested and where people are hurting. And that's where we go next. Read verses 14 through 29 with me. And they came back to the other disciples, and they saw a large crowd around them, and some scribes were arguing with them. Immediately, the entire crowd saw him, and they were amazed, and they began running up to greet him. And he asked them, "What are you disputing about?" And one person from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I thought I brought you my son because he has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth, and he grinds his teeth, and he becomes stiff. And I told your disciples so that they could cast it out, but they could not do it." And he answered them, he said, "O unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? But bring him to me." And they brought the boy, and he saw him, and the spirit threw him into convulsions, and falling on the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. It has often thrown him both into the fire and the water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for the one who believes." And immediately the boy's father cried out and said, "I do believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw the crowd was rapidly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him. Do not enter him again." And after crying out and throwing him into terrible convulsions, it came out, and the boy became so much like a corpse that most of them said, "He is dead." And Jesus took him by the hand, and he raised him up, and he got up. And he came into the house, and his disciples began asking him privately, "Why is it that we could not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot come out by anything except prayer." There's a lot that can be taught through this passage, but I'm going to kind of stick to a theme today, and I want you to see this. The scene, it just dramatically shifts from mountaintop to dazzling light to chaos in the valley, right? And that's real life. And so maybe you've had a mountaintop experience with God's presence. Maybe it was the conference you attended, is the podcast you listened to, is a devotion time. Maybe you saw God come through in a situation that was just amazing, and he was able to handle something that you could never predicted. Maybe it's just each and every Sunday as I unpack God's word to you. Probably not that one. But sooner or later, right? We have the mountaintop experience. Sooner or later, we walk back into the valley, into the struggles of life, into work pressures, into health crises, into doubts and temptations. And when Jesus, Peter, James, and John, when they come down and they find the other disciples surrounded by a crowd, arguing with the teachers of the law, a desperate father has brought his son who's been tormented by an evil spirit. The disciples can't help. They tried, but they couldn't. It's just chaos. Moving from the coolest thing they've ever seen to ultimate chaos. And his father cries out to Jesus, describing his son's sufferings, convulsions, foaming at the mouth, being thrown into fire, being thrown into water, and it's heartbreaking. And you can almost hear the exhaustion in this father's voice. And then comes one of the most honest, beautiful prayers in the entire Bible. I believe, help my unbelief. Right? It's not polished faith, but it's raw and it's real. It's a mixture of trust and doubt, of hope and fear. And Jesus just still honors it. Right? He heals the boy, he lifts him up by his hand. And later the disciples are asking, why couldn't we do this? And it's like, this could only come out by prayer. In other words, you tried to handle this on your own and you forgot about me. And we have some things that we can learn here, right? The enemy does not like the mountaintop. He wants to throw us into chaos as quickly as possible. Think about Moses. He goes up on the mountain, he hears from God, God gives him these stone tablets, right, with the 10 commandments, and Moses comes down with the tablets and he's like, hey guys, I got 10 rules. These 10 rules it's all we need. If we can follow these 10 rules, they're not even hard, but if we can follow these 10 rules, we are going to be a great society. If we can follow these 10 rules, the love of God is going to be on us. If we can follow these 10 rules, our people will grow. If we can follow these 10 rules, like, it's so easy. We can do it. And he comes from the mountaintop where he speaks with God, comes down with the tablets. They're already breaking 1 and 2. And he yells at him, he just smashes the tablets. Right? God doesn't like, the enemy does not like us on the mountaintop. He's going to find a way to try to drag us down. And then what Jesus does here is he shows us, hey, when you move from the mountaintop into the valley, you don't have to smash the tablets. Listen to me. Follow me. And if you've ever experienced one of those moments and you're like, man, you might be thinking like, I'm really going to do it this time, right? I'm going to live for Jesus. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to give him everything. I'm doing it. Get ready for the valley. And then trust Jesus. The same Jesus who would lift this little boy up by the hand, trust that he will do the same thing for you. But if you're in the valley right now, I want you to feel this. Faith and doubt can coexist. Right? Faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's bringing your doubts honestly to Jesus. God doesn't reject the Father because his faith is weak. He meets him where he is. And so that means that you don't have to have it all together to come to Jesus. Our power is not enough. The disciples, right, they had cast out demons before. This wasn't new to them. Like they had done this, but this time they failed. And it's because they relied on their past successes rather than prayer and dependence on God. Right? We do the same thing, relying on our experience, our skill, our strength, instead of just having prayerful trust. Jesus meets us in our weakness. I want you to notice the tenderness here. Jesus doesn't shame the Father for his weak faith. He doesn't abandon the disciples for failing to heal this kid who they could have healed if they would have just prayed about it. He steps into the mess, he brings healing, and then he teaches them. In the valley, Jesus shows us that his strength is made perfect in our weakness. And when you feel torn between belief and doubt, don't hide it. If you feel torn between belief and doubt, don't hide it. That's what I do. I don't want anyone to know if I'm struggling with something, right? But it's so bad for us. Don't hide it. Pray, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. When it feels like a spiritual battle, I want you to remember God is in the valley just as much as he's on the mountain. And victory isn't about our ability, but it's about our dependence on God. And when you fail, and you will fail, remember that Jesus doesn't walk away. He teaches, he restores, and he calls you back to trust. Think about Peter for a second. Last week, Peter made a stupid comment, and this week he made a stupid comment, and as we continue, he's going to cut someone's ear off. And then, as you know, if you continue reading in the book of Acts, he's going to end up being a little racist, and he's going to have to be talked to about that. Like Peter makes a ton of mistakes throughout the Bible, right? And Jesus still entrusted his church to Peter. He entrusts the mission of God to Peter. And so if you don't feel like you got it today, right? You don't feel like you have it all together. You feel like this is a mess here, this is a mess here, I'm messing up here, I said something stupid here. I mean, you're in great company, all right? And Jesus is entrusting his church to you. So church, the mountain shows us Jesus' glory. The valley shows us our weakness. But both point to the same truth, and that is that we need him.